what does it mean to really be educated? I think part of what it means is that you're not simply a product of your own historical moment, right? That you're able to have some perspective on your moment because you've kind of time traveled, which is what a classical education does. So one of the things we're trying to get at in the CLT is a student's ability to grapple, to understand the greatest texts that have been the most influential in driving history and culture for over 2 millennia. So what that means is students come and take the CLT, they may see something from Aristotle, maybe Aristotle's Politics, maybe something from Plato's Republic. They may say something from St. Augustine, in the 4th century, or something maybe from Thomas Aquinas or Dante as well. Maybe something from, Jane Austen in the 19th century, or maybe Flannery O'Connor, in the modern world. But in this great tradition that often is inclusive, of course, it's inclusive of great Christian Catholic intellectuals.
Howdy, everyone, and welcome back to Moment of Truth, the podcast of American Moment. My name is Nick Solheim, and I am the CEO of American Moment, and I'm very glad to have you back with us this week for another fantastic episode. We're able to have the privilege of having Jeremy Tate of the CLT exam on the podcast today. This has been somebody that I've wanted to have on for a long time. We spent a lot of time talking about standardized testing, why Common Core really sucks, and what credentials mean to the conservative movement and how we can create better ones. So it was a very engaging episode. I'm a huge fan of Jeremy and the work that he does over at CLT. And this is definitely an exam that I'm going to be taking a look at for my kids a long time from now because they're very young. But had a fantastic time with him. So we will go now to Jeremy Tate. Jeremy, thanks so much for coming on the podcast.
Hey, thrilled to be here, Nick. Thanks for having me.
So the CLT has a very interesting history and has been, something that I've followed and many other people have followed for a long time. But something that I haven't seen elucidated, at least in a podcast sense, though maybe I've just missed it, is how all of this came to be. How you ended up being, the inventor of the CLT. So could you tell us a little bit?
Sure.
About your background and how you ended up here?
Yeah, it's a fun story. I assure you I was a very normal kid who wanted to play football in the NFL or something. Didn't think I was going to grow up and start a standardized test. Was one of the last things I ever thought. I actually kind of hated school growing up, honestly, and didn't do great either. And when I was 18 years old, gave my life to Christ, became a Christian. Somebody gave me a copy of Mere Christianity. And so really for me, I feel in many ways self-educated, kind of read my way into the faith. It opened up a whole new world. For the first time, I became interested in the life of the mind. And whereas in high school, I was spending my time partying and chasing girls and all that. In college, I went to Louisiana State for undergrad. I was a bit of a hermit. I just couldn't get enough philosophy, church history, Christian apologetics. So that was kind of the beginning of an adventure with understanding what I didn't receive in school, the beauty and the fullness of the Western intellectual tradition. Fell in love with that. I went into teaching in inner city New York, and in a public school setting. I saw that it was horribly broken, and that the actual problem there, which I think was a spiritual problem, wasn't being dealt with or addressed at all. So left there, went to a couple other public schools, and then I went to a Catholic school in 2014, a school run by the Nashville Dominicans, a wonderful school. I've sent 2 of my 6 kids there already. And it's a great school, but I was shocked when I got there by the power and the influence of the College Board. Now, if you haven't heard of the College Board, this is the organization that owns and operates the PSAT, the SAT, and the AP test. And one of the first ways this showed up, this very sweet Dominican sister, Sister Bridget Mary, we'd call them the dancing Dominicans at Mountain de Sales because they were a lot of fun. And you'd see them dancing in the hallways and full of life and energy. But she was introducing 2 new classes. One was an intro to Christian apologetics, and one was an intro to philosophy. And she was so excited. And as a recent seminary graduate and as a convert, we were talking together about the course sequence and the authors. And then registration time came and hardly any students signed up. And I was also the college counselor. So I said, as part of having these conversations with students, why didn't you want to take the philosophy class? These are the greatest questions. What is happiness? What is the good life? And the main answer was, Mr. Tate, it's not any AP points. It's not any AP points, not any AP credits. I thought, man, this is crazy. They would say, even if I get an A, it's going to hurt my GPA because I don't get that, College Board AP full point there. And I thought, this is nuts. We can't get our Catholic kids at a Catholic school to take the classes we care about most because of this secular progressive testing organization in New York City.
Yeah.
So it was the beginning of kind of a dream. And at the same time, the SAT and ACT aligned with the Common Core standards. This is 2015. I also owned a small SAT prep company, and people were just saying out loud, like, where's our test? The two main college entrance exams have aligned with Common Core, which is anti-fiction, anti-classics, anti-Western. The math is just weird, right?
Yeah.
Nobody knows what's going on with Common Core math. What do you got to reinvent math for, right? And so I was actually looking for who was making the alternative because everybody seemed to be asking for it. Where's our test? Where is the college entrance exam that's not Common Core aligned? And then I realized nobody's doing it. I thought, well, how hard could it be? And it turned out pretty hard, but I'm glad we've done it.
So it kind of started off with this this idea that the incentives were misaligned.
Oh, totally. Yeah. And I think one of the few ideas that almost everybody in education agrees on is that for better or worse, the test will inevitably drive the curriculum and shape it, And if you imagine it's just a hypothetical, if you imagine the College Board and ACT said, okay, starting in 2030, the only college entrance exams will be administered in French, right? And you got to take one to go to college if that was a scenario. Colleges, let's assume colleges go back. Well, then everybody's going to be doing French immersion programs, choosing French. The rich parents are going to send their kids to Paris for a year. It will shape education. And so what if the SAT and ACT had always been tests where kids are reading Aristotle and Dante and Shakespeare? It would fundamentally reorient American education. It would fundamentally change American culture, I think. So that's what we're doing at CLT. We're building an alternative that's rooted in the timeless ideas of Western civilization.
Yeah, I've got a bunch of questions about that and the mechanics of the test, but let me start here. This might be a dumb question, but this is something that I've never understood. Is there like a geographic distribution between the ACT and the SAT? Like what's the deal? Why do we all take one of those two tests?
It's a great question. There was. So the ACT comes out of the Midwest and the
so that's why I took the ACT.
Yeah,
Got it.
Yeah. 1959 at launch. And the history of this is fascinating. And your audience may have tuned out because they're thinking, man, this guy's talking about a standardized test. Who cares? But I assure you, the history of this is absolutely fascinating. So the SAT goes back actually to World War I, essentially. So you had what was called the Army Alpha test in World War I. And what they were trying to do on that test was get at somebody's cognitive ability, their aptitude, right? Because they were trying to figure out who's going to be in intelligence and who's going to basically be on the front lines, So talk about high stakes testing. That was pretty high stakes testing. But they used that same concept to build the first SAT in 1926. And for generations, they would say the SAT is a test that you can't really study for. It's measuring aptitude. It's measuring cognitive ability. And the ACT launched in 1959 critiquing that. They said, that's not fair. Students can't control those things. Students should be tested on what they learn in the classroom, which sounds good for a second until you say, wait a minute, which classroom?
Yeah, I didn't realize I took the commie version of a standardized test.
Well, Common Core aligned. As of 2015, both are Common Core aligned. In fact, the grand architect of the Common Core standards, David Coleman, after creating the Common Core, went over to the College Board to be the CEO of the College Board.
Wow. Yep. That's very interesting. Yeah, in 2015 was when I took the ACT.
Yeah.
That was the year that I took it.
Yep.
That's crazy. Tell us a little bit about there's so many places we could go here. Like the mechanics of the test, how it is different from, say, the ACT or the SAT in practice, and then we'll get to the kinds of topics that it covers?
Yeah. So there are all these complexities that I didn't know. I'll make a comparison. My dad fought in the Vietnam War, and he'll always say, "I'm really glad I did it. I never want to do it again."
Yeah.
And I think I'm really glad we started CLT, but holy smokes, if I would have known how hard it would be, I don't know that I'd do it again. I think I would. It's all been worth it, of course. But there's so many complexities on this particular question. And here's why. If you have tests that are measuring entirely different things, you cannot have a concordance chart. And we knew that we needed a concordance. A concordance is a chart that shows you what your ACT would mean if it was a SAT or now a CLT. And so in order to have that, you have to have some degree of similarity between the other tests as well. And so what are the tests trying to get? Well, essentially verbal reasoning, quantitative reasoning, and mastery of grammar and writing, essentially. Those are kind of the three components. And so on the CLT, we wanted to make it very simple. There's 3 sections, 40 points, 40 points, 40 points, verbal reasoning, grammar writing, and then quantitative reasoning or math is a third. The big difference on the math side being no calculators permitted. And out of 120 points, so 120 minutes, 120 points. So we wanted to simplify some of this for students. I think there used to be 187 questions on the SAT, but it's 1,600 points. Students are like, what does that even mean?
Yeah.
And so we wanted to make some of that a little bit more transparent.
Yeah. That's very, very interesting. Moving to the kinds of topics that you cover, being a test for the Western tradition is a little different than, what the ACT and the SAT, what their sort of curriculum to arrive at this test is. What are the expectations of, as you're thinking about these students, what kinds of things they should be learning in all the way up through high school to be well prepared for this test?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I think I would go back and kind of reframe it with this question of, what does it mean to be educated coming out of high school? In fact, what does it mean to just be educated in general? And I think especially right now in this AI moment, this is like one of the most important questions, right? That it means is what does it mean to really be educated? I think part of what it means is that you're not simply a product of your own historical moment, right? That you're able to have some perspective on your moment because you've kind of time traveled, which is what a classical education does. So one of the things we're trying to get at in the CLT is a student's ability to grapple, to understand the greatest texts that have been the most influential in driving history and culture for over 2 millennia. So what that means is students come and take the CLT, they may see something from Aristotle, maybe Aristotle's Politics, maybe something from Plato's Republic. They may say something from St. Augustine, in the 4th century, or something maybe from Thomas Aquinas or Dante as well. Maybe something from, Jane Austen in the 19th century, or maybe Flannery O'Connor, in the modern world. But in this great tradition that often is inclusive, of course, it's inclusive of great Christian Catholic intellectuals, and you look at something like College Board's AP Literature and you read the reading list, and there's some Shakespeare, fine, that's great that they haven't totally gotten rid of everything, but it largely excludes the greatest literary tradition in the history of the world, which is the Catholic Christian literary tradition. We've everything from Augustine, again, to Dante, Boethius, you have all of these luminaries, and the College Board has made it seem like that doesn't even exist.
Yeah.
The degree to which they have censored the great tradition.
Yeah. No, that's very, I think that's very true. What is the percentage of the people that take the CLT, like the breakdown between private school, homeschool, and people who are daring enough to take it coming out of public school?
Yeah. Well, this would really surprise you. So before Ron DeSantis got behind the CLT in 2023, before that, it was 90% of students were coming from outside of the mainstream public school arena. We were back then essentially 30% or so homeschool, and the rest, were mostly coming from private classical Christian schools or Catholic schools. When Governor DeSantis adopted in 2023, that completely changed. And essentially what they did in Florida was they tied CLT both to what's called Bright Futures. And so you can go to University of Florida, Florida State, full tuition, full ride with a certain CLT score now.
Wow.
But it also made it to where a CLT score can satisfy graduation requirements in Florida as well. The students can do that. And so what that meant is we've had a huge influx of public school students taking the CLT over the past couple of years. So at this point, we're actually 80%, 85% public school students.
Wow.
Which has been a huge change for us.
And how do those scores compare to people who are coming out of?
They're not as good.
I assumed as much.
They're not as good. It's true. I mean, you imagine a lot of public school students have never even heard the word philosophy.
Yeah.
Right. They've never seen texts like this or ideas like this. And so, if you're coming from a classical school and you've been reading, Boethius, you're going to be much more comfortable picking up Dante than, a student who's never heard of either. And so what we want to do is reward that kind of a fluency and encourage, we're saying, look, if tests drive curriculum, then let's make sure that the curriculum is being driven in the right direction and in the direction that education always was, which was this great passing down, right, of this treasure, this great canon, this intellectual inheritance. And that's what we're seeing right now.
Yeah. So you have a pretty small sample size in terms of years. I mean, it's been 2 years since the governor has made this, an acceptable standardized test. But are you starting to see early signs of even now some of the curriculum in some public schools changing to reorient itself?
Right away. We got a call within a few weeks, and this school district was saying there's grammar on the CLT, but we got rid of grammar. Should we bring it back? And we're like, yes, you should.
Yeah.
That's what education is.
Grammar seems important.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. So in a really good way. And again, there's no calculator on the CLT math portion.
And what kind of math is it?
So folks who have been doing SAT prep for years, they look at the CLT and they go, oh, this kind of looks like the SAT math portion from like the 1990s. So the SAT got rid of, they went away from what's called aptitude towards this Common Core achievement concept. So they got rid of kind of the old logic questions that people used to love and see and hate sometimes on the SAT. And so a logic question would be a question that doesn't neatly fall into Algebra 1, Algebra 2, geometry, or pre-calc. So I think it looks more like maybe the SAT your parents would have taken.
Yeah.
Because you're pretty young, Nick.
Yeah. And my parents are too. That's very interesting. Where do you want to, I mean, you've got sort of one pilot state here who, has been willing to take a big risk, and it really seems like it's paying off in a huge way.
Yeah.
Where do you want to take the CLT from here?
Yeah. So we had a number of states follow Governor DeSantis's lead this year. So Governor Huckabee Sanders in Arkansas, huge wins in Louisiana, Texas, Oklahoma. So it is certainly caught on, of other southern states, red states right now, that have said, yeah, what we put in front of our students matter. This does end up inevitably shaping the curriculum, and we need to go back and stop being ashamed of having a pro-Western education.
Yeah.
Right. And so I think people have caught on. We just had Pete Hegseth. He got enthusiastically behind CLT, the service academies, West Point, the Naval Academy, Air Force Academy, all came on board in the past couple of weeks.
That was one of the most exciting things I've seen in the last couple of weeks.
Thank you. Yeah, really exciting. And we think that, that there's increasing interest from the administration in CLT as well. And part of the reason for this, Nick, is that we've refused to compromise. One of the reasons it took CLT so long to get traction is because states, when you start to work with states, they make these ridiculous requests. Like, for example, we have a lot of religious figures on the CLT. And one state said, it's okay if you have religious figures as long as you equally have religious thinkers from the major religions. And we're like, yeah, no, we're not going to do that. Right? America was the product of all the major religions. Sorry.
Yeah.
We were born out of, mostly English people, right? Mm-hmm. They came here and were overwhelmingly Christian. And that was the intellectual tradition, as well as the Enlightenment, of course, that really gave birth to America. And that's what we need to bring back.
Yeah. That raises up an interesting question based on something that you said a couple minutes ago, where you were talking about, and as the resident Protestant, I have to do this to you. but you called this specifically, the Catholic canon, which I largely don't disagree with. But you've seen also a huge adoption amongst a lot of like CCCU schools or places like Patrick Henry College, et cetera. So how do you, I guess, how do you hold those two things at the same time, right? That a lot of this, canon is predominantly Catholic, and yet some of the biggest proponents of the CLT have been Protestant schools.
Yeah, yeah. Well, personally, I'm Catholic, but we've got a huge mix at CLT of folks that are evangelical and Roman Catholic as well. So we certainly don't want to call it simply the Catholic canon. I'd say it's the Western canon is a fine term for it. I think it was one common inheritance, of course, until the 16th century. But I think this movement has been really powerful, actually, in bringing Catholics and evangelicals together in a much deeper way, right? Because the ecumenism of the 1990s was basically, let's get rid of anything with sharp theological edges,
right?
And we'll just kind of say, "Yay, Jesus." And that's as deep as we go. And they tried to have Catholic Protestant unity over that. I think what the classical renewal movement has done is it's shown us, wait a minute, you've got a common intellectual inheritance. And so I think, and look, right now you've got a lot of faithful Catholics who send their kids to non-Catholic classical Christian schools instead of Catholic schools, precisely because they believe it's a more Catholic education.
Yep.
Because they're reading the Fathers, they're learning Latin, and these kind of things.
Yeah. No, I totally agree with that. And I think there's a lot of, by and large, I think a lot of, particularly as it relates to education, a lot of evangelicals and Roman Catholics are like 95% aligned.
I think so too.
Like I think the relationship should be a lot closer. When thinking about public schools, and we've skirted around this a little bit, but if a lot of these schools were to think about, or the state departments of education or whatever were to think about a sort of radical change in the way that they educate students, what would be the things that you would prioritize over what they're teaching now?
Yeah, I think the first problem is not content. I think the first problem is telos. The first problem is goal. If you go into any public school and you ask a class of students, what are we doing here? What's the point of school? What are they going to tell you? They're going to say, to get a better job. That for them, that is the point of education.
Or mom and dad said I had to.
Yeah, totally. Mom and dad said I had to, but but the teachers even will say to give them career opportunities and that sort of thing. Education. That's such an impoverished vision for education.
Yeah.
That it's just about getting a job, becoming a cog in a big economic machine. So I think the first thing to address is the telos, right? That we're here to grow in virtue, to grow in wisdom. And these are actually things that I think most Americans actually agree with, right? We may have different ideas about how justice gets played out in the public square, but very few people are willing to stand up for a injustice or argue that we ought to have an unjust society, right? I think we actually agree on things like the cardinal virtues that we have to agree on to have any kind of a healthy, flourishing society.
Yeah. Have you, you were alluding to some of this a minute ago, but beyond the example that you gave about, one of these states saying you have to have equal representation, have you experienced any sort of pushback on the CLT for being too Christian?
Oh my gosh. Yeah, totally.
It's a bit of a leading question.
I thought this was actually pretty funny. So when Florida adopted the CLT, the New Yorker did this spoof on us, and it was kind of a roast. And I actually thought it was kind of funny. I'm glad to see the left getting a sense of humor again. That's a good thing.
Yeah.
And so it said questions from Florida's new classic learning test. And then the questions were like, Jimmy has 6 guns. Mike has 12. Jamie has 180. Who's the coolest? And I'm like, that's fine.
It's definitely Jimmy, by the way.
Yeah.
But
yeah. So that kind of silliness. So we have a lot of, the New York Times said that we were controversial because we had St. Catherine of Siena on one of our test passages. That was the reason they cited that we were controversial, which showed up on our Wikipedia page. And we're like, we're controversial because we had a nun.
Yeah.
Come on.
Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, I think, look, at the end of the day, a lot of folks, on the left, the last thing they want to be called is anti-intellectual. And you simply cannot be opposed to the traditions of Plato, Aristotle, Dante, Shakespeare without being an anti-intellectual. And I do think that is growing. And at some point, this has to become more of a bipartisan thing.
Yeah. Beyond, some of the southern states that have started to accept the CLT, could you kind of walk us through, and the service academies and all of that now over the last couple of weeks, who else is like very all in on the
Yeah.
CLT?
Yeah, I think it's really taken off in what's called the ACCS, Association of Classical Christian Schools. So David Goodwin is a great friend. I was just at an event with him and Secretary Hegseth just last
They
week.
just did their board meeting, right?
Yeah.
Last week, that was the whole deal.
And 90% of ACCS schools use CLT. Classical charter schools, it's very popular. I think within the Catholic education world, we're growing a lot, becoming more popular. We've always been very popular with homeschool students, especially using any kind of a classical. I know your wife did classical conversations.
Yep.
So I think growing there in enthusiasm as well. But this thing is happening right now in college where college enrollment is actually declining. It's actually contracting right now. A lot of colleges are closing. A lot of young people, especially young men, are kind of saying, what's the point? I know this was Charlie Kirk questioned the value of a lot of college education. Tucker Carlson is saying the same thing. And I do think that if the only purpose of college is getting a job, then it might be overrated, right? But if the purpose of college is formation, the purpose of college is to receive your inheritance as a son or daughter of the West, and you go to a place like Hillsdale or the new Hamilton Center at the University of Florida, then it's 100% worth it.
You said so many great things there that I want to pick up on. I'll start with this: the college enrollment in a lot of these colleges closing. Net, is that a good thing or a bad thing?
I'm going to say it's a good thing. Overall, it's a good thing. PPE money and after COVID, it kept a lot of colleges up that should have closed. Markets need to do what markets need to do, and they shouldn't be propped up by government money at the end of the day. And a lot of people aren't going because they're not perceiving value. And they're not perceiving value because the colleges are not providing value. And if you're a liberal arts college and you're actually not offering a liberal arts education and you're just, taking $150,000 from a hardworking American family to turn their kid into some kind of a woke political actor, that's not a good use of money. College should close down, for sure. It's not providing real opportunity. Students are drowning in debt because of that. And so I think a lot of the closures have probably been good. Not all, but a lot have. Yeah.
Yeah. And in your opinion, one of the things that you were talking about was, that particularly young men have been, their rate of going to university has been declining.
Yeah.
I'm a part of that. I'm a part of those figures myself, having dropped out of school. On net, is that a good or a bad thing?
Yeah, on net is hard to say because again, I think if you're going to a place like Benedictine or the University of Dallas or Franciscan or Hillsdale or Grove City or Patrick Henry, where your wife went, there are 4 years that are spent really well.
Yeah.
I think. At the same time, the university does have a problem, right? And the problem is that they no longer own access to information, essentially. The university, basically, they literally physically own the books, right? And now you've got more on your smartphone than the Harvard Library could ever dream of having, right? And so that changes the calculus. What then becomes a value prop for college? Yeah. In a place like Harvard, they're offering, basically the network. They're offering the credential, the Harvard badge, and there's value in that, of course. But the real value is going to be in formation, and so I think it'd be difficult to say is kind of as net. I think for some it's the right call, but look, we're also seeing a revival in the trades. I think that's fantastic. I think a lot of Americans have been sold this idea that college needs to be for everybody, and I don't agree with that at all.
Yeah. Let me put this maybe in a simpler way to answer. What kind of young man should go to college?
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, look, I think, you look at a lot of the greatest minds from American history. Ben Franklin, hardly any school at all. Frederick Douglass, no school. Abraham Lincoln, very, very, very little, right? Some of the greatest minds did not go to not only college, but to any school. They were self-educated, right? Not all people are going to have the power to the ability to do that, And I think if a college or university is offering the right kind of formation, and if a student needs that, knowing themselves, and particularly if you need to get a certain kind of a credential, and I know that's where we can have a conversation for a while, probably. There are some, nursing's obviously an obvious one where, you're not going to become a nurse without going and getting the credentials. And so for fields like that, I think it's definitely important as well. The community aspect for it, I mean, it's a precious thing to be able to have 4 years to live in community with people and to contemplate the greatest ideas in the history of human civilization. That's a real precious thing. And if college can continue being that, I think it's going to have a real future to it. But I think it's a good trend. I think, Charlie Kirk was vocal about this and others. For young men like yourself, seems like what you've done, go out, get a job, get married, have kids. And look, one of my high school friends, he go to college, he went and became a firefighter. And right when we were graduating, he's already making like $90K a year. He's doing that, and he's doing some housing stuff. And so it's certainly not for everyone. And I think it's kind of an individual question of who it's for and who it's not for.
Yeah. I mean, there are a lot of guys too who go into trades like that and still find time to teach themselves. Like one of my closest friends in the world works at a car dealership. He has to drive an hour each way every day. And last year listened through Calvin's Institutes.
Yeah.
And you would traditionally like never expect, somebody to do something like that.
Yeah.
But there's almost no job where you can shirk the responsibility of educating yourself.
Mm-hmm.
You said something else really interesting, talking about like how colleges can be a large part of, personal and mental formation. Mm-hmm. And there has been, I think, a lot of rhetoric with a kernel of truth in it about how, colleges have become over feminized. There are too many women going to school.
62% right now.
Yeah. And I think, at like state schools and that sort of thing, there is a very large kernel of truth to that.
Yeah.
However, you kind of see on the same side this sort of critique of like Christian women who want to be homemakers, like going to school at all. Like, why do you need to do that? And I'm actually going to take the contrary opinion to that. My wife went to Patrick Henry College, which is great school.
And a seriously intense education.
A very serious, intense education.
Yeah.
Yes, that 100% true. And it has made her, first of all, like who she is as an adult woman. But you can also tell, like, she reads a lot. Like, she reads a lot now. And like, I come home and I see that she's reading, X, Y, and Z crazy thing that I feel like I could never get through. It's like, whoa, you got a real, education. I'm wondering kind of what I'm assuming that you would agree, with this thesis, but it can be valuable actually for people who are going to not, end up being in the workplace ever or for a long time to still go to university anyway.
Yeah. Yeah.
As a matter of personal formation.
Yeah, I think regardless of going, I mean, you look at Abigail Adams, you can make a case that she was as influential as John Adams. She literally formed one of our presidents, and she was the main advisor to another president, right? Yep. And she was, a profoundly self-educated woman.
Yeah. And the same thing about Eliza Hamilton.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think regardless of if you're going, because there's a lot of folks who go to college and they're actually not very educated, They kind of just cheated their way through, or just, the degrees have become cheap in the sense that a higher percentage have college degrees than ever before right now. And so I think regardless of if you go to become self-taught, I think becomes the real differentiator, and as I said, after I became a believer, I finally started doing a lot better in school. But when I was in college, I mostly wasn't reading things connected to my major at all. I'm staying up late reading, church history and philosophy. And I look back on all the years of formal education, and it pales in comparison to the informal self-education of just devouring books.
Yeah. Reading stuff that you're interested in.
Yeah.
Like I really like biographies. That's my 70% of my bookshelf is biographies, and then random books about astrophysics.
Love it. Yeah.
That's really my I know a lot about those two things. We've talked some about on this podcast before, this sort of creating a parallel economy, parallel credentials, etc., where conservatives sort of have their own thing. Like this is, you guys have that thing, this is ours. It strikes me that CLT is bigger than that. Like it should actually become the standard. But I wanted to see what you thought about, whether or not this is a conservatives only thing, or you are creating a true credential that'll stand the test of time regardless of political ideology.
Yeah. When you walk into the CLT office, you'll see this plaque, and you at first look, you're like, oh, this looks like a boring history of a standardized test. What is this? But you keep reading it, and then it says in 2040, the CLT surpassed the SAT. And this is graven, right? The CLT surpassed the SAT and ACT as the #1 college entrance exam globally, right? And we had that engraved in bronze in big letters, so we come in every day and we give it a little pound. It's like our Notre Dame play like a champion, pound it. Our goal every day is to make that come true. That's our CLT 2040 goal, is to be #1 over the SAT and the ACT. And it's not a monetary goal, it's an influence goal, and that we want to influence the future of education more than the secular progressive establishment that we are chipping away at day in, day out, year in, year out. So absolutely, our goal is to be #1. And what happens in any industry when you have a leader is that everybody else follows the leader. We see this in the automotive industry, in the tech industry, social media, all over the place, right? And already, folks have sent us passages that have appeared on the SAT and ACT, and they're like, no way this would be on here if it were not from the CLT.
That's awesome.
It is great. It is great, and some, I mean, part of me is like, oh, wow, they're totally copying us. But I'm like, let them copy. Yeah. Great. I said, right. I saw an ACT practice passage with Edmund Burke from their new practice. He's kind of the father of conservative, thought. And I love that. And I think that we did that. I think that that's an influence from CLT and them saying, man, we are growing a tiny bit or contracting a little bit. And CLT, we grew up 200% in 2024.
Wow.
And we went from 25,000 test takers to 150,000. This year, it'll be 250,000 test takers. And so the growth has been shocking and disturbing, I think, to them. And in fact, I had a friend at the college board, and can't name her name, but it said, CLT is discussed in leadership meetings, and they are very nervous at the college. Like, they're nervous of us. We've got 62 people full time. We're a bunch, homeschooling moms and Patrick Henry College graduates, and they're a $1.2 billion empire, and they're scared. And it's because I think we are trying to champion true education. We're not going to compromise on what that looks like. And I think that kind of resolve is something that they're just not familiar with.
Yeah. A lot of the people listening to this podcast either probably have younger children at home or have aspirations to have, kids in the next couple of years, looking, a generation out.
Mm-hmm.
How should parents today be thinking about higher education specifically?
Yeah, we are going through an absolute revolution in American education right now. People are fleeing out of the public school arena. The classical charter schools, the wait list is bigger than the whole school in most classical charter schools. Mm-hmm. They can't build these schools fast enough, right? And as soon as parents find out what this is, oh, if I send my kid here, they're going to come back more honest. That's the goal of the school. That they're going to learn to grow in virtues like generosity.
They're going to become better people.
Wild. Yeah, totally. Generosity. And you're like, yeah, that's what education was supposed to always do.
Yeah.
We just completely lost it for something else. So yeah, I think, there's so many forms of this too. Homeschooling like you did, that's continuing to take off. It's funny. There's no neat point where homeschooling becomes totally just schooling again. Cause I hear all of these stories where it's like, we were homeschooling, then we got together with these families. And then this parent did this class and we did this class. And then we realized it was a school,
Yeah.
and they actually just formed a school at that point. So there's so many fun kind of grassroots organic things that are happening, which I think is really cool.
Yeah. How should Christians and conservatives be thinking about credentials? And to be more specific with that, should we be thinking about them in terms of like their merit in their academic rigor, or if the credential itself has stood the test of time?
Yeah. It's a tough question. I mean, I think we are in every facet a way overly credentialed, society right now, and this has been used as a lever to control education. And right now, I mean, take just teacher certification, and generally, you've had to go to the ed schools and ingest all of these bad ideas in order to then get in front of students to become a licensed teacher. So right now, I think we need to either one get rid of that, or we come up with alternative credentials. And we're seeing that happen right now in places like Florida, where they have a teaching certificate in classical education, as well. So I think that credentialing has been used, by the political left as a way to kind of force ideology.
Yep.
And so I think the two real options, as I see it, is try to get away from the credentialing model, or to have different credentials.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think there are like non-university credentials too. Like I think the fellowship that we run, I mean, that was sort of our kind of foundational thesis behind this, right? Was taking in people who otherwise would not be able to get their foot in the door here because they didn't have the credential from Harvard or from Yale or whatever, put them through this 12-week program. And then, hopefully by the end of that, just through virtue of people being able to see their work product, seeing the curriculum that they were getting, and just being with them in person, they'd be more likely to get a job, more likely to be like highly favored, I suppose, in that sense. Like, what about the non-university credentials, like shorter things?
I just recently hired my first non-college educated full-time at CLT.
Wow.
We're a college entrance exam, and we just hired someone who didn't go to college. And I heard about this, this young man had applied and made it through a round of interviews and was very impressive. And they said, well, he didn't go to college. He said, how do you do on the CLT? He had taken the CLT, and he did very, very well, And so I thought, well, this was a homeschool student. He crushed the CLT, and he could have a very eloquent conversation about why he was considering not going to college.
Yeah.
And so college in some ways for some people, again, is a slow, inefficient way to signal, essentially. But I think you can do that faster. And so we've had these conversations for years at CLT of, are we going to begin to evolve in ways outside of the university credentialing system? We're seeing this with companies even taking a look at things like Duolingo credits and this kind of thing. So I think that we're entering into just now kind of a new Wild West of credentialing that's going to, I think, offer a bunch of different routes, is my take.
Yeah. Yeah. That's very interesting. Do you think that, the conservative movement has an institutional weakness in, promoting and advancing young people without credentials, or with like lesser well-known credentials?
Yeah. I don't think it's so. I mean, we just, as a nation, mourn the loss of, perhaps, certainly the most influential conservative under 35 for sure. Like, no doubt about it. Probably one of the top 3 or 4 in the country, with the passing of Charlie Kirk. Didn't graduate from college. I understand he went for a little bit. And I didn't understand until Larry Arnn was giving was speaking at the funeral, that he had done 31 online Hillsdale classes, so he had received that education there. But I think for him to rise to be the level that he was at, and that I don't think that there's a problem with kind of just looking for folks that have the credentials. It may be different inside DC. I'm sure it probably is.
Yeah.
But I think to me that was exciting.
Well, and he, by the way, was a Charlie was a very, very committed reader.
Yeah.
Like he read a lot.
Yeah.
That's right. In his free time. Well, that is all very interesting and a very good word. Where can people find out more about you, about the CLT exam, and so on?
Yeah, definitely. You can find me on X. I'm at Jeremy Tate 41 on Twitter, cltexam.com. Check us out. 350 colleges and universities accept it right now, and a lot of enthusiasm behind it. Part of what we want to do, Nick, is not just provide better content, but to provide a better overall user experience. So if you call CLT, you're going to talk to somebody who actually wants to be talking to you as well. And I think
going to a call center.
That's right. Okay. That's right. Not at all. And so thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you for coming on. This was a great episode.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us for another great episode of Moment of Truth. And thanks to Jeremy for making the time to come all the way down from Annapolis to be on this podcast. I kind of feel bad for him because now he has to drive back in rush hour, but that's showbiz, baby. So fantastic episode. We'll make sure to have another great guest for you next week. Thanks for tuning in, and we will see you again next week. Moment of Truth is an American Moment podcast taped at the Conservative Partnership Campus Studios and is produced by Jake Mercier and Hunter Smith, with original graphics and title cards by Jared Cummings. Our intro song is A Minor Struggle by Ryan Serenich, and our website is AmericanMoment.org.